Hey Kevin, how are you?
Yeah, good, Mike. How are you?
Yeah, very good, thanks, very good. Just starting my timer. Perfect. Yeah, no, good, brilliant. This week we're going to talk about personal branding.
Yep.
So the key thing for me is obviously, if you look at a lot of the work that you've generated at Resignal, a lot of it's via your network. So just kind of like talk about how that's happened.
Yeah, so I think it's just happened because that's the world that we're in. And certainly, when I speak to agency owners who have been around a while and have done things, there's a common theme that quite a lot of their new business comes from word of mouth. And that's normally because you have one people or maybe multiple people in that company that are quite well networked. And certainly, from my perspective, um, that's definitely been the case in terms of how do we attract new clients, how do we get referrals from people that we've worked with before, how do we grow the team through recruitment, and it's all about the network. In fact, I tweeted this morning and basically said my biggest strength that I've realized now isn't that I've got this amazing knowledge where I know everything. I definitely don't, but I have the network. It means
Yeah,
if I can't figure out a problem, I more often than not know who to ask. And
absolutely.
that now has been such a big strength that I found that it's a combination of, to me, some of it is offline world, just do great work for people and stuff happens in terms of referrals because you're doing a good job and people will want to recommend you.
Yep.
Um, some of it is more online. How do you actually invest some of your time in your own thought leadership and um, putting yourself out there, sharing opinions, and then you build an online presence as well as a real world presence that helps you to get recommended more often. And that's certainly been the case for us.
And how did that kind of start? So if you look back, I mean, there's a few lessons we'll go through as we go
Yeah.
through the kind of session, but just kind of go back. How did you get to have the kind of profile that you've got? Was it by design or kind of by accident?
Oh, completely by accident. So what I quite like is that I'm kind of like the last generation of people that didn't grow up with social media. So I had a mobile phone at the age of about 17. And I remember at the time it was kind of like, if people want to get hold of me, then they probably know where I am. I don't need a mobile. So I think I was even a bit late to that. But
Yeah.
um, and social media, I remember I went traveling in Australia and in 2006, 2007. And I remember I had to, maybe like halfway through the year, I sent a bulk email to a load of friends and just like, this is what I've been up to. Here's some photos that I've taken. And that sounds crazy now because everyone just shares stuff on Facebook, Instagrams, and I think Facebook came in after that, and probably quite shortly after that. But at that point in time, it definitely wasn't a thing. It wasn't that I've grown up with this and I'm natural at using social media because I've done it since the age of 6. Like that's just not the case.
Yeah.
And I've had to kind of like learn and evolve, and the platforms themselves have changed a lot during that time. I was one of probably quite an early phase of people using Twitter from an SEO perspective. I think that probably would have been, yeah, maybe like 2007, 2008. I'm kind of making it up, but around that time, you can actually check back on my profile. But certainly between 2007 and 2009. And what I found is through this accident of writing about stuff, so firstly through blogging, I was writing this almost as like a journal of I'm learning stuff and I don't want to forget it. So if I'm writing, this is what I'm learning right now, I can trace back to it, and then that's useful. I'm running my own test and learn experiments to figure out what works in SEO
Yeah.
because no one has the answers, and we're all on this journey trying to figure it out as we go along. And to a certain extent, I think that's still true today. But that's worked very well because then I realized that actually it's not just me with this problem. Other people are reading this, and then other people are now, as social media started to kick in, they're then sharing it. So I think it's gone from maybe a background of I haven't grown up with social media. I sometimes find social media really weird in the sense of I'm I'm not sure I want to share my life with
Yeah.
everyone. I'll happily share it with my close friends and tell them anything, but
Yeah.
um, yeah, I don't naturally want to like overly share. Like if someone comes up to me and they follow me on social media and they ask how was my holiday somewhere last week, I get freaked out. It's like, I just find that weird. And but I think at the same time, I've always tried to embrace, okay, well, this is good from a work perspective. From a personal perspective, I probably wouldn't use it. I'd probably just delete. And in fact, I have done this in the past. I've deleted accounts because that's not how I communicate with friends. But from a business perspective, I think it's important to have a presence that, again, it's like the more that you give back, the more you get in return. So if I share what I'm learning, I can
Exactly.
help build and grow my own network.
So here's a question. So do you think that, so I hear this a lot, and it can be an excuse. Do you think so if you go back to, like you said, like 2007, 2008, so you've got 12 years of history of experimentation and then communicating those experiments. So back in the day, 2010, everyone was learning, it was all new, and there was less noise. If you tried to do the same thing today to build your personal brand, would it work? Because there's now so much noise, there's so much more learning that's been going on. Would that same strategy, do you think, work now?
Yes, but I think it's harder.
Right.
I think you take Twitter as an example. I think I've got like over 10,000 followers on Twitter through the fact that longevity, being early, being one of a few number of people to follow in the early stages,
Yes.
as opposed to now it's a much bigger industry where you need to stand out. And there's an argument now that in order to stand out, you kind of have to be almost a bit loud and shouty. And I'm not sure I like that approach at all. I don't personally. If other people,
that doesn't suit your personal brand, does it, at all? It's not who you
no,
are.
and I think that's one of the points of, I've never been that comfortable with the word personal brand. It's that I'm a person, I'm not a brand. It's a extension to who I am as a person. And I think I'd like to think of myself as kind of like quite a humble person. I don't have any need, like I was saying, to share stuff unnecessarily with people that I don't know that well. But at the same time, how do you take that as an extension of what you're doing in social media life? And I know it's more genuine, it's more authentic, because rather than trying to be someone that you're not and then not living up to it when you meet someone, I feel like people would just see through that. So I think you have to make that your own identity. So if your identity is a bit shouty, then fair enough, that's what you do. Everyone's different, and that's great. But it's finding what works for you. So yeah, I don't know. I've kind of forgotten what your original question was.
No, so it was about kind of like, I think it was around if you try to adopt the same strategy today as you did back in 2008, 2010, would it work? And you're saying basically, but it'd be a lot harder. Which leads me to the next point, which is around niching down. So, I've got a big thing about, pick a niche and try and dominate your niche. And I picked it up from you. I've picked it up from a whole number of the people that I know, and also from kind of podcasts and stuff that I follow, particularly Pat Flynn, who talks about this a lot. He talks about being like an inch wide and a mile deep. And that kind of resonates, I think, again, with what you're saying about the branding is, if you were starting out on this journey now, a lesson for people that are listening, you've got to pick a niche. You've got to pick something that you can really stand out in. You cannot be a generalist and get a great, and it's not about numbers of following, but you can't have high engagement if you're a generalist and you're new to the game. What's your view on that?
Yeah, my view is that's completely true. I think in the early days, because SEO was new, I could get away with, I'm learning a few new things and no one else knows much about it anyway. So I'm an expert because I know slightly more than someone else. And now everything is much deeper in terms of that knowledge and expertise. And you can't know everything. Like SEO is a great example of, to be the ultimate SEO or have the best SEO results, you need to be strategic, you need to be technical, you need to be creative, you need to think about how you can improve conversions, user experience, etc., to the point that that's not one person, that's a team. And what you really need is then, okay, let's pick one thing. how do we go deep on page speed optimization and be really strong at that? How do you do page speed optimization for e-commerce? Like that type of thing.
Yeah.
That's where you can have really deep expertise. And I think I saw a Venn diagram a while back. In fact, I tried to find it earlier when I tweeted something myself, but it was everyone in the world knows something that someone else doesn't know, and they have this sweet spot of information that they know more about something than someone else does, but you need to ask them the right questions to figure out what that is. And I feel like once you know that, I always think of if there's an intersection of 3 different things that you really know. Like for me, I think combining SEO knowledge certainly with business experience of like how to run an agency, I found has worked very well. Yeah. Maybe you want to supplement that with a niche. So you could say, or a sector, kind of like e-commerce is a good example, or you could say travel.
I mean, for me, that's a good example around, and again, I think we've had conversations on this before about that Venn diagram. Yeah. So I've gone like, okay, for me, I want to be known for negotiations within marketing services when you need to understand how procurement work. That's a very, very niche topic.
Yes.
But what I'm finding is those people that have that problem are like, Mike's the guy to go to.
Yeah.
So you start to get a reputation. But what I'm finding is that, geez, does it take a long time? I mean, I've been on this little mini path of this new niche offering for a year. I'm just now starting to get people going, oh yeah, talk to Mike.
Yeah, that's right. It takes a while to build up. A bit like running a podcast. When we've looked into why to run a podcast and success results from podcasts, you see everyone talks about year 1 does that, year 2 does that, year 3 does that, year 4 does that.
Exactly.
And it's the same sort of thing. And there's, I think this is I heard of this through Tim Ferriss, but I think it's from Kevin Kelly, who wrote about 1,000 True Fans. And
right, yes. Yeah.
I really like that concept because it's,
just you're not trying to be people that don't know.
You're not trying to be all things to everyone. You're trying to, like, from a blogging perspective, or even tweeting or sharing posts on LinkedIn, I always find it's better to write for one person. Quite often, some of my best thought leadership pieces have been, this is an email where I've answered a specific challenge for a client, and I've had to really think about it and put effort into, this is what I'm doing. And then I've realized, actually, by answering that one specific question, there's more people with that challenge.
Yes.
But you're not talking about a mass audience. I'm not going on social media talking about what Boris Johnson is doing around coronavirus, for a reason that, one, I don't feel like my opinion is all that worthwhile.
You're not qualified.
I'm not qualified to give that. I may have an opinion on it. I don't think people should really care what my opinion is. And secondly, that's not an audience that I'm going for. So actually, if I can, rather than try to create something that has national media almost style reach, why don't I go for an audience of people that really get where I'm coming from?
Exactly.
And then if you've got those 1,000 true fans, the idea is, again, like the concept of sneezers, you have those people that can take that message further for you, further forward for you, because they really get it, they're really passionate, and they become your network army of people that can help you to share and spread that message, which is how the whole concept of social media works.
So go on.
Yeah, look, if you have a popular message on social media and lots of people are liking it, sharing it, commenting, the platforms are geared up around their algorithms to give you further reach to a wider network of second connections, third connections, because it's resonating with your own audience first, that they give you more airtime, essentially.
So give the example this week. Your LinkedIn post this week, that was, I think you've got like 80 odd people commenting on it. I don't know how many views that got. What was that post on? Was it around Don't Buy Cheap?
Yeah, so actually it was good timing. It was around, it was on the day of, we recorded the procurement episode, and my point was cheap isn't cheap. And basically from an SEO perspective, if you're paying purely on price, then there's a good chance that you're going to have to come back and pay someone to do it again properly, because
Exactly.
you're not always you're not getting value. Price and value are two completely different things. So I mean, you can clearly overcharge and not provide value, but you can also do that the other way around, and that just resonated with a lot of people. And I think by having those types of opinions, what I found with social media that works quite well is sparking a conversation can help to just generate much more discussion. So in that case, it was quite a very kind of concise and quick post and observation.
Yeah.
And I think we'll come on to the fact of like long form content, but I think there's a place in social of, if you've got something to say as a short and snappy quip, if you like, then I think social media does lend well to that. Like, people will like to grab it. They have a short attention span. They're just kind of scrolling through stuff. So they'll like, share, forget about it, and carry on. There is a snowball effect behind that as well.
Yeah, I mean, so interesting that, so this week you talk about kind of niching down. So I just had a call with someone before this podcast recording where this guy, Paul, he's a business development director in quite a big agency, global agency, marketing agency. About a year ago, he'd seen one of my guides, which was like a long form guide. We'll come back to long form content a bit later. A long form guide. He'd then seen quite a few of my posts. He talked to someone who knew of me, and he was an ex-procurement director, and I've written 2 or 3 posts recently that really resonated with him. And then he reached out and said, I'd like to have a call with you. So that's taken a year for someone who's an ex-procurement director, who now is a business development director in a global marketing agency, that's thinking about negotiation skills training, that's got a very particular niche thing on his mind, and then he reached out. And that took me a year for him to find me. You know, it's anyone that thinks there's a shortcut, unless you're a global pop star, there just isn't.
Oh no, I think this is a long game, definitely. And it's what I found. I did this years ago. I analysed the last 100 people that I engaged with on Twitter, and the software that did this. And the very interesting thing from that is I then counted how many of those people have I met in real life. It was about 85. The percentage was very high. And the interesting thing from that is the people that you engage with as that small group of network, and the people that you engage with most often, it's generally how do you continue that conversation with people that you've met.
Yes.
And maybe that's personality types. I did a personality profile, and one thing that came up for me was I'm a relationship deepener, which basically means if I don't like the almost like speed dating style of approach of a networking event. If I go to an event and I come back with 100 business cards, I won't feel happy about that. I feel drained. I want to sleep for a week. But I'd much rather have a conversation with 3 or 4 people all night and actually just really enjoy it, and then feel like I'm building a relationship with those key people.
So a little story on that. I went to a conference about 5 years ago now, and it was a kind of business development networking conference. There was a sales guy there. There must have been 200 people at the conference. I think he got a business card from everyone in the space of a day. He would literally come up to you and go, "Hi, my name's Jeff. How are you? I'm in blah, blah, blah. You know, great to meet you. Have you got a card?" He was a card collector. That guy would have got no engagement at all from anyone in the room.
No.
Ever.
No, but I would imagine his business card has been spread over about 100 different bins across the UK.
Correct. Exactly. The trick in the events, I find, is how do you find the person that's going to have the most engaging conversation with you? That's the key. So a little tip for me, or from me, is whenever I've gone to an event in the past, I've always looked at the delegate list beforehand and gone, there's 5 people here I'd really like to meet. I think there'd be a very interesting conversation. Let's see if I can find them. And have a conversation with them.
I think that's smart, and I think that's the way that we approach things from our own kind of marketing perspective.
Yeah, it is
very targeted. Actually, it's more how do we run events with the people that we really want to run events with, and then they're the ones that we speak to. And I think with social media is a bit different. Social media is more about how do you get a wider reach, but it's still got to be targeted. It's not a, how do I connect with absolutely everyone that's going? I
Exactly.
quite often, probably maybe like once a year or so, but like Twitter's a good example of, I'll just go for a cull of, I'm
Yeah.
following, I know when I follow too many people because the news feed I follow just gets annoying. And then it's like, okay, well, why am I following these people in the first place?
Yeah.
And then if I do a bit of a cull and clean up and it's the people I want to follow, it becomes a nicer place again. And
Exactly.
I think that's really important in terms of keeping the engagement up. And you are playing, it's a numbers game to a certain extent, but you don't want to sacrifice quality. Quality is the key thing, absolutely.
So, a couple of things, because like we've got probably about kind of 9 minutes or so, 10 minutes to go. So one question around learning your craft, but always keep documenting. You've got a bit of a thing about this. What does that mean?
Yeah, so I think there's two schools of thought on this. There's one that is basically ignore social media until you have something that's important to say. And then once you've nailed it and you've been successful, then talk about it afterwards. And honestly, I completely get that. I think a lot of people waste too much time on social media and they don't achieve anything and they're distracted.
Exactly.
And they should probably just ignore it and do what's most important and worry about that at a point in the future when it's more relevant to them and they've got experience to share. I do get that school of thought. I think the other side is actually we're all on a journey together. I've done SEO since 2003. There's no way I consider myself an expert. And if other people want to call me that, then fair enough. But I see that the day I think I've made it is the day I resign and retire and stop doing it, because it's all a journey and you all have to kind of keep continually learning, certainly in a fast-paced industry.
Yeah.
And in that situation, it's about, okay, I'm going to try a few things. And we've got a Slack group just yesterday where there's a challenge that I'm working on that's quite new. And I think nothing's completely new. It's always there's a new way of looking at things, but an old problem. And just by being able to talk to someone about that is really useful. And that's the type of things that can turn into new thought leadership. I lent an idea somewhere and changed it, evolved it. Exactly. And that's how you document as you go along. I prefer, again, that genuine approach of, I don't have all the answers, don't do as I say, but I'm going to share what I'm learning from. And if you want to take something from that, take it and do something with it. If you want to ignore it, then fine. I'm not telling anyone what to do. So yeah, generally I buy into both approaches, but I think the documenting as you go along, I think is a good way to go.
Definitely. So an example from a different world. Back in 98, I read an amazing book, 98, 99, called The Innovator's Dilemma by a guy called Christensen, who's quite a famous guy in Harvard, who wrote this book about why do certain innovations succeed and why do others fail. Mm-hmm. And the old favorite is the Betamax VHS argument. And one of his conclusions from memory was, actually, it's not completely breakthrough transformation innovation that wins the day. It's often the aggregation. If you take different things that already exist and bring them together in a new format, that can be very innovative. And one of the reasons for that is that because people can relate to it. If you do something that's completely unrelatable, that's brand new thinking, there's only a very small number of people that will understand it and engage with it.
True.
Whereas if you bring together 5 pieces of content that people kind of recognize but give a different angle on it, they're far more likely to engage with you because it's come from different sources and you're giving an extra, it's not spin, an extra insight, a different angle, a different thought. And I'm quite a big fan of that. I think when you bring content together, you aggregate the content and then you put something on top of value. I think people genuinely go, yeah, that's quite interesting. Haven't thought of it that way.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, it's kind of how do you bring it together and make something unique for that audience.
Yeah. So long form content. So I've got a question. So I'm thinking of writing a book. Yeah. I'm thinking of writing a book for 10 years. I still haven't written one. Mm-hmm. But I'm thinking of writing a book. So obviously long form content.
Yeah.
So what's your view on long form content for personal branding, books for personal branding, speaking on platforms for personal branding? You know, where do you think is the best investment? You talked earlier on as well about, and you've talked to me about effort and reward.
Yeah.
So where do you focus your effort, because it's time constrained, to get the maximum benefit if you're trying to develop your personal and your business brand?
I do quite like the pyramid approach, which is you have at the very top the pillar piece that you're doing.
Yeah.
And then as you go down, let's say that is a book. Then as you go down, you've got a series of articles or PR coverage or something like that. And then as you go further down, you've got the social media coverage. And I think the challenge can be you get stuck in the bottom part of the pyramid and you just do lots of social media. But actually, when you look at what's the substance behind it, I'm not sure it is. It's just social media, social media, social media without tracing that back to something bigger. So I think actually starting at the top is really important. I think the problem is everyone gets this. I mean, there's studies around like the dopamine hits you get off of the red likes on Instagram and all. Like it's all the very smart people that have codified this to get people hooked onto it as if it's a drug, and getting them away from that drug of, oh, I'm just going to do a social media update is not the same. But I think it's something that, I think this was on Blair Enns podcast, but he was saying no one comes up to you in the street and says, oh, I love your Instagram, because people just scroll through it, they like stuff and they don't care. It's just they forgot they even saw it. Whereas people might come up to you and say, oh, I love your book. That one concept here changed how I approach something. Or I love your podcast, or your writing on your blog that's more of a consistent effort of, these are things that you're doing. It's not just a quick snapshot, throwaway comment that people see, people like, people forget about almost just as quickly. So I do think there's complete value in how do you do something bigger that is more memorable, and certainly in terms of how do you make that work from a referral perspective. If that's what you're looking to achieve, then I think the word of mouth off the back of doing something bigger is likely to be much stronger, as opposed to if it's just kind of a continued effort of social, which again I still think is important, but it's doing it in the right way.
So long form content is still valuable. Putting the effort into long form content
is valuable. I think less people do it now. I'm guilty of it myself. I used to write a lot and I don't that much anymore. And
is that an opportunity, Kevin, do you think? Do you think there's an opportunity for people going, actually, if long form content is kind of on the decline, then there's an opportunity to write great long form content for those people that are engaged? Back to your point, you want the people that really like what you say and your insights. So target them with long form content. Does that make sense?
I think so. I think it does. And I think, how much can you really give people from a short and snappy social update that has real value, that impacts them? Probably not that much.
Probably not. But no, exactly.
I think if you had an approach where this is a taster and an intro from that social update into something bigger that you can read about and learn about, then that's where I think it has a lot more value.
I mean, interesting, if you go back to, and I go back to this reference quite a lot in my life, and that's because it changed and shaped my life. You go back to my days at KPMG, those 4 years were formative years. And one thing we talked about a lot was thought leadership. You know, as a consultant, you were encouraged to write, because we were a professional services firm. It relied upon our insights and our ability to understand complex problems and boil them down. Well, you do that through writing long form content. And
that keeps you sharp. The one thing I find is, if I'm going to go on stage at a conference, I don't want to look like an idiot. So I'm going to put work in to make sure that I'm on top of my game and I know what I'm talking about. Likewise, if you publish a blog post, there's an element of nervousness when you hit publish, that it's like, oh, what if this is, actually it's not that smart, or I thought this was good. And I feel like actually that's a healthy way to think, as long as it doesn't put you off publishing. I think it's good to almost have that nervousness over, I'm challenging myself. I want to put something out there that is good and valuable to people. And I know there's a school of thought that is, if you're not nervous before you're doing this, then maybe you're not doing it in the right way. Like you should be worried about, actually, what reaction am I going to get from this? Am I don't know, it doesn't have to be controversial, but are you putting something out there that is going to be of value, and always challenging yourself and your own thoughts and way of thinking?
Exactly.
I think is really important.
A good way of practicing that, by the way, is to do webcasts. Doing webinars, what I found is that if I get 60 people registering and you get 50 attendees, what's the drop-off rate? So the key thing is to work out, do they stay to the end? If you see people dropping off within the first 10 minutes or the first 5 minutes, then you know you've got something wrong. And don't be worried about it. Learn from it and just go, okay, that didn't engage the audience. I was on one the other week, and it was billed as a 30-minute podcast webinar, and I left within the first 3 minutes. Why? Because the person on that webinar spent 3 minutes selling.
I knew you were going to say that straight from today. It's just self-promotional. Yeah.
And it's like, I'm not here to be sold to. I'm here to learn something.
Yeah, and tell me something useful and I'll care about what you do afterwards.
Yeah, exactly.
Tell me why I should work with you further down the line, not at the start. Yeah, you've got to give them a reason first.
Whenever I do my webinars, I have one slide on who I am. And I say, we're going to get over this quickly. Here's my background. It's 30 seconds, 15 seconds. Yeah. And then we're done. And then we're into the content. Yeah,
and that's the same with social media. So if you put something out that's on social media about how you're looking for clients, etc., so that's an advert. Unless you're giving value, no one cares. Whereas actually, if you give value, they'll click through to your profile. They might send you a message.
Exactly.
But it's because you've given value and you've given them a reason to do that. And then obviously the engagement behind it will help to attract more people.
So we're at the end of our session. So key messages. What are your kind of key takeaways from this?
Key messages is, number one, always keep documenting. We're on this learning journey together. No one's cracked it. As soon as you think you have, there's something new. That means then you realize you haven't. So always keep documenting and improving and engaging, like giving back. How do you help people? And the more that you can help people, the more they're likely to help you.
Yep.
I think one of my key things is, I'm a person, not a brand. Be genuine with it. Be who you are. And then it's a natural extension to what you're doing. And social media should be easier to put the effort in. If you're trying to be someone that you're not, go into social and forcing yourself to be that person every day. I don't know. It feels wrong. And I would imagine you'll probably just get bored very quickly, and it's not going to work for you.
It won't be genuine. Just won't be genuine.
And yeah, I think the last point is kind of more quality over quantity. It's not just like when people ask me how many updates should you do a week or how many blog posts and stuff like that. I mean, it's good to have a discipline over, I'm going to think about writing, as opposed to I'm going to write when inspiration strikes, because that doesn't happen and stuff gets in the way. But setting yourself a target of, I'm going to do a social media update every day or 3 to 5 a week, whatever. Like, I think it's okay as a loose goal, but it's more about the quality. If you go above and beyond that or below it now and again, but you're quality controlling what you're doing, I think that's more important. So keep the messages on topic, and like we're saying, keep it on niche. So I kind of, sometimes depending on the channel, I might mix it up with personal updates or talk about football or something like that. But generally, if it's Twitter or LinkedIn from a business perspective, I'm there to talk about SEO, agencies, business, like the stuff that I know about and that my audience has an interest in, and then keeping that message consistent whilst still being a human. There's no harm in saying this is what happened in the Champions League or something like that. Like that, I think that's okay, but it's like the core of what you're talking about. You're there for a reason, so it's keeping consistency and quality behind that message.
I think in this market, kind of my concluding point is around that niche thing, is that this is it's now a global market. Everyone's got access well, most people got access to online materials.
Yeah.
You've got to niche down. You have to find a niche within a niche within a niche.
Yeah.
Yeah. Spreading yourself too thin in this market is a disaster. People need to know you for something. Better to be known for something small, niche, where there's money that you can make money from, than it is trying to become, you know, an agency, a full service agency from scratch. Is like, wow, well, that's going to be a bit of a voyage of discovery, because it just doesn't work in this market.
Yeah, and I think that's it. It's just finding your voice. What do you have that really has value? Because if I'm all things to everyone, then there's no value to anyone. It's much more about how do you have that small audience that you can then build outwards from.
Very good. Kevin, great. As always, it's great to talk to you. And yeah, I look forward to next week. Okay.